What I'm going to be demonstrating today is a vacuum lift that I've constructed for picking up my wing skin and moving it to the over to my wing skeleton. The wing skin itself is probably about 3 feet by 12 feet long, and of course is very awkward for one person to try and handle. Normally in the demonstrations that I've seen, generally there's an assistant to try and help move the wing skin. But for me, I think it would be sort of hard to try and ask someone to come out every time that I want to move a wing skin back and forth, especially since I'm scratch building. So what I'm going to do here first is provide a quick demonstration of this vacuum lift in action. And then after I'm done with that, I will go into a little bit more detailed explanation of its construction in case someone may want to do something similar. Okay, we'll go ahead and get set up here to do this move. Like I said, after I get done moving transferring the wing skin over and demonstrating how that works, then I will go into a little bit more detail. It could get a little noisy because the vacuum on this is it could get a little noisy because the vacuum on this is a Venturi vacuum, so you will hear a bit more noise. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, and that pretty much concludes the moving of the wing skin from the table onto the wing itself. Now, to go back the other direction, it is a little bit different because you are dealing with a curved surface here. You are dealing with a curved surface here, but there's enough flexibility here that it'll be able to go ahead and pick it up. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate pulling the wing skin from the wing itself and transferring back over to the table. Okay, and that pretty much concludes the demonstration of the transferring the wing skin itself. If you are interested in more details of how this is constructed, then I will be covering that shortly. Now that the demonstration's been done, I will start covering some of the details of how this lift is constructed in case someone may want to try and do something similar. Of course, what makes this all work is a vacuum cup. And this is, I believe it's a 40 millimeter vacuum cup that I purchased off eBay. It's from a company in China, and I'll post the link to that in the video description below. The lift on this, of course the lifting on this depends on how much vacuum you draw, and the amount of vacuum that is generally generated with the Venturi vacuum setup that I have set up, or that I've put together, is anywhere from about 10 to 15 psi. There are some leaks in this. I've tried to do what I can to seal this up as much as possible, but 10 to 15 psi is more than enough. The wing skin itself, I've got it trimmed down some, is about 14 pounds, and I've got 12 vacuum cups spread out over the length of the skin itself. So that's, just a little over 1 pound per cup. So at least in theory, I could get away with as little as 1 psi, but of course you want to have as much suction as possible when you're picking this up. The tubing itself is 6 millimeter tubing, and that's part of the reason why I picked this particular type of cup design, or purchased this particular cup, because it is a 6 millimeter connection on there. Now going a little further up. Of course, you've got to have some way to be able to connect the various lines together. And I've got a variety of these quick connect connectors, and they operate very, very simply if you haven't seen one before. Not sure if I can do it without getting my hands completely in the way here. But it's very easy. You just push in on this, you can pull it out, and then when you want to put it back in, you just push it back in. It's more commonly used, I think, on water lines, but it's also worked quite nicely for the vacuum. And it's quite possible that, this may be where the source of a lot of the smaller vacuum leaks that I'm seeing, and I'm just not able to pull, say, 20 inches of vacuum. So coming over here a little bit further, this right here is the Venturi vacuums. And if you're not familiar with the Venturi vacuum, it does rely on what's called the Venturi effect, where have an airstream pass through a constriction. It reduces the air pressure, and that in turn will if it's low pressure, can draw the air out through the get this more centered up. Can get the air. Can draw the air out of the system. And again, for the setup I've got right now, it's anywhere from about 10 to 15 psi. I do have two of these set up in parallel to get a little bit more suction. One vacuum pump by itself generates about 10 psi, or 10 inches of vacuum. Two of them together gives me about 15. So that gives me a little better performance. Actually, the other reason I go ahead and do this is to try and have a little bit of redundancy, because I could see one possibility, just like in an aircraft with a carburetor, that you could get icing. I could see, especially the humid summers that we have here in Oklahoma, the possibility that these Venturis could try and ice up during the summer. So if I've got a second one, then I've got a little bit of a fallback that I won't wind up dropping the wing skin. Now, another important thing that you want to have on a setup like this is a way to measure the vacuum pressure, and that's what this gauge is for right here. You just want to be sure that you are drawing adequate vacuum, or if I'm seeing like less than 10 psi, then something may have worked itself loose and I need to go through and check all my connections before I actually do a lift. The way I'm running it right now, I do not have any kind of a safety net underneath, so if this vacuum lets go, then it probably would destroy the wing, or destroy the skin if it fell to the floor, because it would probably wind up getting dimples in it or something like that. Plus, it would just be rather awkward to try and pick up a big skin up off the floor if it did drop. But at this point, I've had no problems with that. Now, just going back over here, I've got a vacuum valve. I also have a solid length of tubing with this securely tie wrapped down. I've got this set up the way I do so that I've got some amount of strain relief. In my initial test, I just had the hose going directly into the line, but of course there was a tendency for the hose itself to move around when I'm especially when I'm lifting up, and I didn't want to take a chance on twisting off the twisting a vacuum line off and wind up dropping the skin. Now, the frame itself is 1010 series 8020. There were a couple of reasons why I went with this. I mean, first off, I've used it quite a few times, and of course it's very flexible. It has more than enough strength for this particular situation because, again, probably the frame itself weighs more than the skin. So even though, I mean, 1010 series 8020 is 1 inch, and it does flex some, it definitely doesn't flex in any kind of dangerous way from what I've seen so far. And on top of this, I mean, we are talking 025 aluminum, so I mean, it's got a little bit of flex as well. And again, I haven't seen anything to indicate that I would have a let go or that the skin would be damaged in any way. The situation where you would most likely run into skin damage would be if the skin manages to twist in 2 different directions. Then you could wind up putting a dimple in the skin with this type of setup with the cups evenly spaced across the skin. At most you're going to get some flexing in one direction, but you really shouldn't see any significant flexing in the other direction. One other thing I'll mention real quick for dealing with small leaks that are in the system. One thing you'll probably want to get is what's called vacuum grease. The stuff that I've got is Dow Corning high vacuum grease. It's very viscous and sticky. You probably wouldn't want to try and use something like regular bearing grease or even Vaseline, because it just wouldn't be viscous enough and could wind up getting actually pulled into the vacuum system. The places where I've generally found that I've had to add vacuum grease, where I've seen it make a difference, is around this joint right here, and then actually in this area right here. So again, if you do decide to build this type of vacuum frame, it's definitely worthwhile to have some of this grease available. What I'll cover next is the lifting system for this, which, of course, starting down at the arms of the vacuum lift, I've just got some basic angle brackets that attach to the arms of the vacuum lift in 4 points. I happen to have some wire rope, so essentially I constructed a wire rope system to be able to pick this, to be able to support the frame when it's being lifted. I think it's important to go ahead and have the the frame not just being picked up at one point, because this is at least for this fairly thin structure. The further out you can get as far as providing support, then that'll help reduce the flex when you're actually doing a lift. Now, the next part we'll look at is the pulley system, and I'll go ahead and say ahead of time that the type of pulley system that you don't want to get, or the type of pulleys you don't want to get, are these relatively cheap pulleys right here. The big problem with these is that they have no bearings in them, and while they do spin nicely when they're unloaded, as soon as you load them up, they just lock up tight. They're pretty much useless as pulleys, even though they cost like $5. The type of pulleys that you do want to go with are essentially, they're definitely a bit fancier. They will cost you a bit more. I think this was about $30, and I've got 2 of these to form it's either a 3-to-1, or I think it's a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1. I think 3-to-1 pulley system, because of the way I've got this set up. But these types of pulleys are the ones that are used by arborists, for example, or rock climbers. And these have the bearings in them. They operate very smoothly and definitely worth getting. And of course, for attaching things together, different parts of the system, you definitely want to have a good supply of carabiners. Again, as far as rating goes, this is carabiners rated for like several thousand pounds. Of course, is way overkill, but they are, they're good carabiner. They're definitely well worth getting. Now, one thing I'll point out here is what I've used for supporting or locking the pulley in place, and so that I can walk away from it. And what this is called here in orange is called a prusik loop. And I won't go into details of how a prusik loop works. There's tons of videos on YouTube that will cover that. But I would definitely, even if you don't plan on building this, I would highly recommend looking up and understanding what a prusik loop is, because it's, definitely, anything that can sort of take a rope and lock it in place and allow you to to walk away from a load to do something else is definitely a very useful bit of knowledge to know about. Get this drop back down here, and then we'll look a little further up here. Again, this will be the other half of the pulley system. And again, it's the same type of double pulley up here, same brand carabiner, to make it easier to move the to allow twisting of the entire assembly. There's also, try to reach up here and give a good view of it, is basically a swivel, so that makes it easier to adjust the position as far as turning is concerned. What I'll cover next is how this is all supported. The main vertical member is a piece of 2-inch 80/20 that is 8 foot long, and of course there's nothing that says you have to use 80/20 for this. You could almost certainly use 4x4s, for example, if you didn't want to use the 80/20. Part of the reason I went with 80/20 is again, it's quite flexible. For being able to support it vertically, of course, you could do sort of like a gantry crane setup. In fact, I mean, if you already have a gantry crane, then you're already halfway there. In my case, I don't have a gantry crane in this particular building, so what I opted to do instead was set up a mounting system, again using a 20/20 80/20, which is basically 2-inch by 2-inch 80/20, and attaching that onto the tables that I built. And of course, in this case, I mean, all the loads are pretty much vertical. There's not going to be any side loads or anything like that, so I consider it more than adequate to, just go ahead and clamp this. Of course, the other advantage is that if I do need to make fine adjustments to the position of the vertical support itself, then it's just a matter of undoing a couple of bolts, and then I can slide things back and forth as required. So for the horizontal member, essentially the spacing between my two tables that I have is approximately 12 feet. So what I've got is a 2x6 by 12 foot long beam running across. And I don't actually have this tied down to anything. Essentially, I stuck a couple of pieces of 80/20, just attach those on to restrict side-to-side movement, and then of course there's a piece on the back to keep it from slipping off the end. I just decided it would be a little bit more convenient to just go ahead and have that free. Again, we're talking just vertical loads here, so it's not like I'm expecting anything to really jump around or anything like that. Now, the other thing that I'm using for the transport, this right here, if you've never heard of it before, is called Unistrut. And it's used quite often in industry for assembling things, assembling various structures or frames. But the other thing that this comes in handy for is they sell what's called a trolley that will actually fit inside this Unistrut. And so this gives me a convenient way to be able to transfer my load, transfer the wing skin back and forth between the two tables, and of course get like nice convenient holes. This one is a double wheel trolley. They also sell the single wheel trolley, which is right there. Now that's good for doing like light support of the of my little pull cable that I've got, as well as the air hose that I've got running across. But I don't think you would want to use that for the actual load itself. The single wheel trolley, I have had some problems even with the hoses, sometimes wanting to bind up a little bit, where I don't really have that problem with the double wheel trolley. And the other thing I'll point out here that I couldn't quite show as well earlier is the swivel that is attached to the pulley system for lifting. Now the green hose that I've got here is called Flexzilla hose, which is supposed to be a very flexible air hose, which I will admit that it's definitely much better than the PVC hose that I've got. When I tried to run the PVC hose up here, of course, it was just very stiff, and of course it's winter right now, so that made it even stiffer. So it made it a lot more difficult to be able to traverse this trolley back and forth between the two tables. So if you do build something like this, I could definitely recommend giving the Flexzilla hose a try, or something similar, good high quality hose that is flexible and also doesn't get stiff whenever the weather gets cold. Another thing I'll point out here are these hangers. You will need to get hangers for this. If you don't, there is not enough clearance inside the unistrut for this trolley to fit. And of course I found out about this sort of the hard way. The trolley fits in just fine, but if you try and there's not enough clearance in there for a bolt. So you have to buy these special clamps. They do sell a tall version of these as well, but since my Lowe's carried this size of unistrut, I figured it was easier to go ahead and just buy the length of unistrut that I needed at my local Lowe's, and then just order these extra support brackets off of Amazon. So that's all I'm going to cover as far as the vacuum wing lift. Certainly let me know if you have any questions, and I will do my best to answer them. And of course, you sort of do this at your own risk. There's certainly no guarantees that how well this may work if someone else decides to try it. So far, I haven't had a chance to use it a whole lot yet, but it looks like it's going to work quite well for me. Of course, I'm no expert in vacuum systems. I'm sure somebody that does this for a living will look at it and probably have all sorts of interesting comments and suggestions, which I would certainly be interested in hearing those. So if you got any questions, feel free to let me know.